Hello, my name is Pam Sinclair, and I'm a biologist with the Canadian Wildlife Service in Whitehorse, Yukon. My presentation today is on aspects of molt ecology of the rusty blackbird in southern Yukon. Before I get started, I would like to invite everyone interested in rusty blackbirds to a workshop in October to discuss a conservation action plan for rusty blackbirds. Please register for free at rustyblackbird.org. Some basics on the rusty blackbird. This species nests in boreal forest wetlands across the North American boreal region and winters in bottomland hardwood forest and other habitats in the eastern half of the southern USA. Populations are steeply declining over the past several decades, as was first brought to light by Russ Greenberg and Sam Droege in 1999. It was realized that there were large knowledge gaps. Very little was known about the basic biology of this species. An international working group was formed in order to determine causes of the decline and ultimately hoping to reverse the decline. Reasons for the decline were investigated. I won't say much about that here, except to mention that 15 years later, reasons for the decline remain fairly unclear. We have learned that when investigating causes of the decline of a migratory bird, it's important to consider the full annual cycle. What is limiting, where, and when in the year? First, we need to know, where are the birds when? Let's look at the rusty blackbird year. These birds nest in May to July, and a given pair would spend about 2 months raising young. At the other end of the year, birds are on the wintering grounds for about 3 months, December to February. But where are they and what are they doing for the other 7 months? This has been investigated by members of the working group. Jim Johnson and colleagues in Alaska put light-level geolocators on birds, and here are the results from 3 individuals. The Alaska breeders, when heading south, stopped for about a month. They had a stationary period on their way south in October, November. You can see the one individual stopped for about a month in South Dakota, one in Iowa, another in North Dakota. They all stopped for about a month, stayed in an area, and before proceeding to the wintering grounds. More recently, Jay Wright investigated a study site on the south shore of Lake Erie in Ohio and also found that rusty blackbirds had a stationary period there during the migratory period. In spring, March and April, birds stopped for about a month, and then also in fall at the same site, rusty blackbirds stopped for about a month. October, November, similar timing to those birds from Alaska. So we found out a few things about where the birds are when. We also need to know, what are they doing there? Here's where I'll introduce the topic of molt. During a bird's annual cycle, there are 3 major activities that take a high amount of energy: breeding, migration, and molt. And generally, birds will tend to try to do these things at different times of year and not overlap, presumably because of the high energy demand. So for example, a female that's producing eggs is not likely to be heavily molting, or a bird heading off on a big migratory flight is not likely to be heavily molting. They tend to do these things at different times of year. So molt for a rusty blackbird. What is their schedule? In fall, rusty blackbirds have a complete molt where they grow a whole new set of body and flight feathers, and most birds do this. But what's unusual about the rusty blackbird is that this is also true for the first-year birds, for the juveniles. For most songbirds, the juveniles, which have just finished growing their first plumage, starting in the nest, the juvenile plumage, most songbirds then in the fall will molt body feathers, but not the flight feathers. But rusty blackbirds and a few other blackbird species do this. The juveniles will, although they've just completed their juvenile plumage, they will then grow an entire new set of feathers, including flight feathers. Then in spring, rusty blackbirds have a pre-breeding season molt of body feathers. And this is a recent discovery. Claudia Metke-Hoffman and colleagues published in 2010 the discovery of this pre-alternate body molt. Previously, it was thought that the rusty feather edges on a rusty blackbird's winter plumage just wore away over the winter, and that's how the spring plumage was produced. But it was found that they are molting on the wintering grounds more and more towards March. And then Jay Wright also found in his stopover site in Ohio on the south shore of Lake Erie that birds were molting there as well. 98% of his birds caught in March and April were molting there. So that's the other molt for rusty blackbirds in the spring, a body molt. Now, our objectives for this Yukon study were to investigate the period between nesting and departure from the boreal region. So rusty blackbirds finish nesting in June or sometimes as late as the first half of July. But then throughout the fall and even into early October some years, there are lots of rusty blackbirds around in southern Yukon. So what are they doing in the Yukon for those 3 months? Is it a stationary period? Are they molting? This shows our 3 study sites in southern Yukon. And when you see where we are in relation to the rest of the breeding range of rusty blackbird, we would expect to have local breeders as well as birds from Alaska passing through in fall after the breeding season. So we had 3 study sites: the Whitehorse landfill on the left. In the middle there is the Teslin Lake Bird Observatory, which is on the shore of Teslin Lake, a long, narrow lake that is a leading line for migrants. It concentrates migrants, so that is a migratory corridor. And then on the right is the Albert Creek Bird Observatory, which is situated in the middle of boreal forest and boreal wetland habitats. The 2 sites on the right are part of the Society of Yukon Bird Observatories banding stations. So birds were misnetted and banded for the 2 bird observatories. That was part of their normal banding operations for their migration monitoring. And at the Whitehorse landfill, it was targeted misnetting specifically for rusty blackbirds. We did this for 6 years, from 2005 to 2010, and recorded the usual information that you would record while banding birds: age, sex, body condition, and molt information. Results. We banded a lot of rusty blackbirds, 1,148, mostly in fall and mostly at the Whitehorse landfill site. This shows the seasonal distribution of captures. The different colors are different years, so these are all the birds over those 6 years. On the left is spring. You can see that most of our captures of rusty blackbirds in spring were the last week of April and the first week of May. And then in fall, we had captures from the last week of July to the first week of October. Most birds were captured from the last week of August to the third week of September. Looking at the age of birds, first-year birds versus older birds. At the Whitehorse landfill, the vast majority of birds were juveniles. At Albert Creek, it was more of an even ratio. At Teslin, all the birds were hatch-year birds. And looking at molting, we did find that these birds in fall were molting. So here are the number of birds captured and color-coded for molting versus not molting. So you can see that towards the left, we have the last week of July through the third week of August. All of the birds captured were actively molting. The orange shows molting birds. And then progressing through the season, the ratio of molting to not molting birds decreases as birds finish molting. So not molting generally here means finished molting. And then by the first week of October, all of the birds have finished molting. We give each bird a molt score, scoring each primary and secondary flight feather, so that a score of 0 indicates a bird that has not yet started molting, and a score of 75 indicates the bird that has finished molting and has its complete winter plumage fully grown in for those flight feathers. You can see that on the left-hand side in the last week of July, molt is well underway at the start of our capture season, a score of around 30. And then as we progress to the right and through the season, the first birds reach that 75 score of 75 at the top in late August. And then as you continue along, more birds have finished. And then by the first week of October, all birds have finished molting. If we look at young birds versus adult birds, so adult versus young of the year, on the top graph, that's adults, you can see that they finish molting earlier than the young birds below and appear to depart. And then the lower graph shows young of the year taking longer to finish molting and staying a bit longer at the sites. So looking at molting birds versus non-molting birds, the molting birds stayed longer. So now we're looking at the length of stay of birds. And the way we got an indication of the length of stay was by recaptures of birds. So we banded hundreds of birds, and a few of those birds were captured more than once, up to 4 times, usually just twice, but up to 4 times. 57 individuals were captured more than once. So it's based on the results from those 57 birds, split up. I think they were split about evenly, molting and non-molting. The longest number of days between first capture and last capture was 35 days. So molting birds stayed longer, up to 35 days. If we look at this separated by site, birds stayed longer at the Whitehorse landfill site, and they stayed the shortest amount of time at Teslin Lake, which would make sense because, as I mentioned, that is a migration corridor and birds were on the move at that site. On the right, looking at length of stay by season, birds stayed longer in fall than they did in spring. And finally, looking at body condition. Each bird was given a fat score for fat deposits. And as you look, this graph shows from the second week of August progressing to the first week of October, the fat scores of the birds increase. And if we look at molting birds versus not molting birds, birds that have finished, during that same time period, the orange bars show the birds that have finished molting, and you can see that they have more fat than the birds that are actively molting. So to summarize results, I don't think I'll go through every point because I won't have time, but the main thing is that we documented a stationary period within the boreal region during July to September, during which birds are molting and staying there for up to 35 days. Some take-home points, again, the discovery of that stationary period within the boreal region when birds are undergoing their complete molt, that pointing out that juveniles grow 2 complete sets of feathers within their first 4 months of life, which indicates high energy needs for post-fledging birds. And then also this artificial site, the Whitehorse landfill with abundant food, was attractive to juvenile birds. Does this occur elsewhere? And does this put fall juveniles at risk in any way from exposure to toxins or other hazards? I have some questions for further research that I won't be able to go through because I don't have time. I'd like to say thank you to everybody that helped with this project, and thank you for listening. And once again, I'd like to invite you to the Rusty Blackbird workshop. Thank you very much.